All right. So my name is Sofia Ehrich, and I am an art historian, academic researcher, and curator of multisensory experiences. And right now, my work is with the European-funded project Europa, which advocates for smells and smelling as important to Europe's cultural heritage. And today I have a very special guest because, well, she's very special to me, Caro Verbeek, who is an art historian and also a curator and author and professor known for her sensory approach to art, history, and scholarship. She completed her PhD on the role of senses in the futurist movement in 2020, in which she developed the framework for a university course called Knowing by Sensing, which we will talk about today. And she is now a curator of works of Piet Mondrian and de Stijl at the Kunstmuseum in The Hague, which holds the largest Mondrian collection worldwide. And as curator, she worked on a cross-modal guided tour, clapping to the beat of Piet, which accentuates the visual rhythm of Mondrian's art. So welcome, Caro. I hope you're well today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I feel so honored to be here on your show.
I'm honored to have you here today. So today we'll talk about multisensory approaches to education and olfactory art, history, and smelling. And we also will do some smelling, of course. And so on a practical note, we cannot have an interview with Caro without sniffing. So during the interview, we will participate in what Caro calls a kitchen cabinet smell session. And so before sitting down to listen to or view this interview, please grab some peanut butter. So I have peanut butter here. And then you can grab some eucalyptus essential oil or Vick's VapoRub, which you can kind of see here. And so we'll let you know when we will do the smelling. So then you can interact with the smells during our interview. And Caro will explain why we will be smelling that smell. Okay, so just to start introducing you, I'm very excited to have you on the Internet of Senses podcast today because you're such a trailblazer and pioneer in this field. You say that rather than being within the scent industry, you position yourself in scent culture. Can you explain the difference and at the same time explain some of the work you've done within the field of smell and smell curation?
Sure. I feel that scent culture is somewhat broader than scent industry. Although I did do my PhD with the industry, with I don't know if I can mention their name. Yes, because they're in my PhD, IFF. I worked a lot with IFF in reconstructing smells and using their data, organizing smell tours with them. But when it comes to scent culture, I think it's broader. It's also about heritage. It's about communities. It's about scholarship. It's about well-being. It's about inclusion. So in the broadest sense. And your other question was what have you done with smells?
Yeah, it's some examples of work you've done with smell and smell curation. I know there are many.
There's some sirens here in Amsterdam. I hope you didn't hear them, but they're almost gone. Yes, I started working with smells in 2010. I did my first smell event, and that was at the Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam. It was called Do It, Smell It. So it was very much focused on don't just talk, don't just listen, but actually do something, start smelling. And that's the first time we invited an aroma jockey to actually illustrate all the lectures. The amazing art historian Jim Dropnik was there. He's the first olfactory art historian. And all his examples were, well, aromatized by this aroma jockey. And other things I did was guided tours with smells for children, for grown-ups, so they can better understand what they see in paintings or historical events. I did many guided tours with blind people and people of low vision, so that they can actually have access to stories, to people, to objects through the sense of smell. I think that best sums up what I do with smell. I use it as a medium to get people to talk.
Yeah. And can you explain what an aroma jockey is for fun?
Yes, yeah. The abbreviation of aroma jockey is AJ, so just like a DJ or a VJ. They usually work at parties. So they diffuse aromas to increase the atmosphere, just like a VJ would project images, and a DJ, of course, plays music.
Mm-hmm.
And the aroma jockey really collaborates with the VJ and the DJ in creating what you could call a total work of art. So it all comes together, and mostly pleasant smells, I would say, a classical traditional aroma jockey. So during lectures, I invite them to also diffuse maybe a bit less common, less pleasant smells, some historical odors.
Yeah, and it's always a really amazing experience to see the aroma jockey at work. I've had the pleasure of seeing that happen and smelling that happen.
Yeah, and it looks amazing because there are clouds of vibrant smoke. It's so synesthetic. You can actually see the smells diffusing in space.
Yeah, it perfectly goes into our next question, which it's important to emphasize that you not only focus on smell and olfaction in your work, but you also always talk about all five senses and how they influence each other. And you talk about synesthesia. So can you explain what synesthesia is and why it's important to talk about not just individual senses, but how they cross and how they influence each other?
Absolutely. There are many definitions of synesthesia, so it's always a bit complex. Depending on who you talk to, people have different ideas about it. The present day definition would be a very neurological definition. So one sense is physically triggered, let's say your sense of sight, because you see something, but you experience it in one or even more other senses. So seeing sounds would be an example, hearing smells, tasting words. It can also be not a sense, but a concept. So letters can have certain colors or smells. Smell synesthesia is the rarest type of synesthesia, by the way. But in the past, let's define the period around the 1900s, early 1900s, synesthesia had a different meaning. And then back then it was called correspondences, how the senses correspond. So instead of saying blue is the smell of cedar, one would say, okay, what is the common denominator of both the color blue and the smell of cedar? Maybe it's a certain emotion, maybe it's a certain even vibration. It was defined according to vibrations. So that's slightly different. Kandinsky did not paint the music by Schoenberg. He painted what was beyond. So what both the music by Schoenberg and his abstract painting had in common, which was, in his case, movement and emotion. So yeah, slightly different definition, but it's always about how the senses are combined, how the senses influence each other, how they're never operating autonomously.
Yeah, and Caro has actually helped me realize that I have slight synesthesia with artworks and sound. When I visited her at the Kunstmuseum, we were looking at the style artworks, and I realized that I could actually hear them. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. So you really hear it in your mind, right? A true synesthete really hear it as though the sound is there. And I'm actually more of a I have very strong associations and vivid imagination. So I don't think I'm a synesthete, but I can imagine lots of multisensory. Well, I experience multisensory phenomena in my mind when I look at things as well, but you have it really strongly.
Yeah, it is pretty strong. And when I experienced your guided tour with the Piet Mondrian works, and you would play music with the works of art to match them, remember when I would say, no, that's not right. So it's very strong and can be very strong. It's And and you've explained in your Knowing by Sensing course that some people actually have it so strongly that it affects their life. Like the woman who was it colors and numbers and at a bus stop, and she kept not catching the bus because the number on the bus stop was a certain color.
Yes, absolutely. Let's say for her, 7 is green, and then she saw a bus with a green 4, and she thought, hey, that's my bus, number 7, and she kept missing it. Yeah, yeah. And there's also a synesthete, James Wannerton, and he tastes words. So while you talk to him, he has a succession of gustatory experiences, and some can be really bitter and really foul. So if you say a wrong word, he might even, well, suffer because of the words you're pronouncing.
Wow, that's so interesting. I mean, and also sad, but
yeah, but it can also help people. Some people that are extremely good at playing music or extremely good at memorizing dates, they might have a form of synesthesia in which they see a code of colors in space around them, and it's pre-linguistic. They don't have to think. It's not rational. They can simply say, okay, 2045, Monday, 3rd of July, that's green. So, and then or the other way around, they see it's green and then they know, hey, that's the 3rd of July and it will be on a Thursday. I don't know. It's incorrect what I said, but it's an example.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your framework for the university course that you've created as part of your PhD research. So you created the framework for a university course at Vrije University in Amsterdam, and it's called Knowing by Sensing. And can you tell our audience about what the course is about and what is taught in the course?
Sure, absolutely. And I thought of this term, knowing by sensing, because there's already quite a large movement called knowing by doing. Meaning, as a historian, as an anthropologist, as whatever you study, you don't just read, but you actually recreate. You find a recipe for a certain paint by Rembrandt. You want to understand how it really worked. Then you recreate that paint and you start painting with that paint. But the one thing I thought was still missing was knowing by sensing. So instead of recreating a bell, historical bell, I would also want to recreate the sound and then try to learn something from that sound. And in this course, we learn about all the senses: smell, taste, touch, seeing, hearing, also proprioception, our inner senses, synesthesia. We learn about it and we learn through those senses, while also maintaining the awareness that, of course, we can never experience what someone in the past experienced smelling that same scent. That doesn't mean that it's not informative. And I find that so important because it's often dismissed. Sensing is dismissed as subjective, not informative, too emotional. Yes, smell can be very emotional, and music and touch can be very emotional, but beyond the emotions or memories, associations that a sensory impression evokes, one can also try to analyze those impressions on a more analytical level. I can say, when I smell myrrh, I can say, it smells, I don't like the smell, hedonic evaluation. And one could say, it reminds me of my grandmother. But one could also say, hey, I can smell this from really far away. It has a very large volume. It's very strong. Or, hey, it actually smells warm, trigeminally warm. That's transhistorical, that myrrh smells warm. That's not cultural. So look beyond those idiosyncratic personal associations and see if you can find characteristics of those smells and read at the same time. I don't say stop reading. I say read, sense, use as many strings of information as possible and see if you can get extra information from experiencing and reading.
Yeah. And my next question is, why is it important for students to learn through all their senses? But I wanted to say first that I met Caro because I took her class, Knowing by Sensing, and it definitely left a huge impact on me and my life. And after I took the class, or while I was taking the class, I was like, this is amazing. This is also so important, because as someone that doesn't learn best by just reading lots of texts or taking tests or sitting in classrooms and just listening, I always had a hard time with that since I was very young, just learning through that. So taking this class, I thought, my God, this is revolutionary for me, just to sit through a class and learn in this way of not only, like you say, you read, but not only doing that, but then putting it into a movement or into a practice, and learning through those processes is so amazing, and you learn so much. And that was what really I was always very much impacted by this. And I still remember a lot of your course as well, which I think is, very important to say, right? That I still remember like something from each class that we did. And this was, I think, 3.5 years ago that I took your course now. So yeah.
Wow, amazing. And may I also add to the dear listeners that Sofia was one of the best students of the entire course over the past years, from the beginning till the end, and most enthusiastic. I also remember you are so enthusiastic and asking many questions. And what you say here is essential, because indeed, not only does it inform you, sensing can inform you, but it also caters to different learning styles, just like you said. Some people learn better when they move. Some learn more when they see something, others when they feel something. So in this way, every learning style is catered to. And the more, this is also scientifically proven, the more senses you trigger, the more likely you are to remember something, because there are more pathways in your brain at work, more entrances, more doors and windows are opening to lead to that one insight that you gain. So I think that's also a very important point. And I feel, well, I'm so happy that it did this to you, because that's exactly what we were aiming for, what we hoped.
Yeah. It's still, I mean, one of the most fun but also informative classes I've taken, and it's just, I think it's so important to keep going. So make sure you keep teaching it.
Thanks. Hey, and what was it that you remember? What was the most fun, most memorable element in the course? Because we did a lot of
well, for some reason, even though I'm in smell now, I of course, with Odoropa, and always working with smells and smell projects, but I always remember playing that organ together with everyone, because I think we were 5 people, and we were able to play this instrument all together, which I thought was very moving, and like a moment to have with others, and also just fun to be able to see and use an object in its original form, because usually you're just listening to it, right? But we actually went inside an organ as well, right? Yeah. Inside the instrument, and we could listen to it being played while we were inside the actual structure. So that's something I really remember.
Yeah, funnily, me too. It's also the highlight when I think of the course. It's also a highlight for me. And I think because during that session, indeed, you need to use your whole body to play that instrument. The valves, you need to pull them. We're all moving, it's teamwork, we're listening, we're looking. And Hans Vidom, he's the professor who teaches listening at Vrije Universiteit. And he also made us walk around and see how it influenced how the sounds evolved, and if they were different in different parts of the space. It was so mindful.
It's really fun. I enjoyed that a lot. And can you talk a bit more about why the methodology of the course is important to you and why it's important to multisensory practice as a whole, or sensory learning as a whole?
Yeah, I can answer it both from a personal point of view and maybe a more collective or higher point of view. When I started working with smells, diffusing smells, about 20 years ago, I did my MA thesis on smell. And then when I started lecturing and asking the organizers, hey, can you please put up an electrical fan because I'm going to diffuse some smells? And then the answer would be, no, we're an academic organization. And I was like, okay, so it's not academic to smell. It's academic to look at smells on pictures, but it's not academic to smell. Something's going on here. There's something funny. There's a taboo on smelling in academia and in daily life. And I thought, okay, I want to be the advocate of the sense of smell. I'm going to fight for this. And now I feel that it is taken more seriously to actually smell, use your sense of smell as a serious tool. So that's one of the personal reasons. And well, it's also scientifically proven, it's a fact that many people find it very hard to think about smells and to imagine smells. So the explanatory gap between language and smells is much bigger than between images and words. So if you've seen a Rembrandt before, I mean, it would still be crazy to go to a symposium on Rembrandt and not seeing any images of Rembrandt's art, but at least we can, if we've seen it before, imagine the paintings by Rembrandt. But in the case of smell and taste and proprioception, often we read about smells, or we've never smelled it before and then just think it's not important, or if we've smelled it before, we're having a hard time imagining that smell. There's a word for that, olfactorizing a smell, imagining a smell. So it's necessary, absolutely necessary, to stop fooling ourselves and thinking that language can give us all information, and instead use language, sensory impressions to fully inform yourself. So yeah, two reasons.
And I think the class, I could see that your class is important also because you bring so many people together. Like, so you go into each class with a different, you could say, expert speaking about a topic that day. And it really highlights this interdisciplinary and communal space which the sensory world has, right? We can't do it alone. We need to make sure that we consult others and learn from others. So it really highlights this. Your course is just like, it shows that we have to talk with each other and share ideas and share knowledge, and then also have students, of course, that we have and feed that knowledge to for the future. So that's another thing I think that's very important to highlight.
Beautifully put, beautifully said. And since also the students come from lots of different backgrounds, I mean, I don't see myself and my fellow teachers as people just sending. It's also receiving, sharing, and the students from their different backgrounds share so many new insights, new ideas. They're creative. So it's really, indeed, it's a community, it's a shared space. We learn from each other. And that's one of the reasons I love teaching, new insights, because of all the brilliant students and indeed fellow teachers.
Yeah. Great. So you still teach, of course, and you still teach your Knowing by Sensing course, but you now also curate the works of Piet Mondrian. And originally you weren't sure that you would be able to put the multisensory approach in your curation. But I know that you now have, but can you quickly tell us who Mondrian is first and how you discovered that his works are in fact multisensory?
Yes, Piet Mondrian. We all recognize his paintings, the red, yellow, blue, white, gray, and black lines, horizontal, vertical. That's to sum up his neoplastic painting. But Piet Mondrian was born in 1872, and he first was a traditional painter of landscapes until he moved to Paris in 1912, and there he discovered a type of music, the predecessor of jazz, ragtime, and that actually inspired him, not Picasso, not Braque. That inspired him to paint, well, in the manner, the way that he's still known for today, music and mostly rhythm. And when I discovered that, I thought, hey, can I use the knowing by sensing approach here? Should I just tell people about that he moved to Paris and he enjoyed rhythms, or shall we actually play those rhythms in the museum? And even more, what if we even start clapping to those rhythms? Clapping to the beat of Piet is what I called that tour, multisensory tour. We dance. Mondrian was also a great dancer, took professional lessons because he saw dancing as creating compositions in space as well. So dancing, music, painting, so many senses come together when it comes to Piet Mondrian, who didn't even want you to see the color planes and the lines. Yes, you were supposed to look at them, but those were just gateways, doorways to something much bigger and rhythmical. And yeah, rhythm is one of the most fascinating phenomena because rhythm addresses at least 4 senses simultaneously. 4 senses. I don't know any other activity that addresses 4 senses. Yes, okay, eating, making love, but all those senses then give you different information. In rhythm, it addresses 4 senses at a time while giving the exact same information. You can, of course, see rhythm. If you clap your hands, you can feel it on your skin. You can hear rhythm, and you feel rhythm proprioceptically. That's what makes me move my hands at the beat that I hear. So rhythm combines interoception and exteroception. And that's why it's so phenomenal, I think. Yeah.
Obviously, you believe there are more senses than the 5 classic senses that Aristotle, which is, the 5 that we know. But do you want to explain a few more senses that you highlight maybe in your course or in your Mondrian curation, and explain what they are?
Sure, yes. One of the senses, well, it's a group of senses. It's called proprioception, so the feeling of oneself from within. Aristotle actually did name it, but throughout history there were different names for this inner sense. And Herder, the philosopher, called it beautifully, he called it the fingers of the mind. So in your mind, within, you can feel things, even just by when you look at someone who's being hurt, you can feel pain yourself. This is part of proprioception. So you mirror with your mirror neurons what someone else is going through, and then you feel it in your own body. This is, of course, essential for empathy. And this very sense is also essential for Mondrian. Mondrian wanted you to feel inner movement. Another sense that's part of proprioception is kinesthesia, from movement. And kinesthesia makes you feel where the different parts of your body are. So for the listeners, I'm sure that you, without looking, can now feel where your left hand is. I tried to feel where my nose is yesterday, but that's harder. It's easier to feel body parts that can move. And you can also sense where your position in space is right now, not just visually, but really kinesthetically. You can maybe, if you're sitting down, you can feel the weight pressing on your behind, and you can feel where your feet are, how the weight, how you can shift your weight from your left to your right foot. So yeah, I think it's the most important sense we have. We can live without our other external senses, except touch, I would say. But proprioception and kinesthesia, I think it's very hard to survive without that all-encompassing sense.
One of my friend's grandparents, they lost their sense of touch and smell, I think it was.
Oh.
Because they were very old, so they were losing some of their important functions of their body. And I just remember hearing this and thinking that is absolutely horrible, because yeah, like you said, touch is really important for us socially, for ourselves, and to feel better, as well as smell, right? That we do a lot with smell as well to kind of make us feel good and happy and think about our past or our present. So yeah, that really affected me when I was told that. So yeah.
Wow. And those are also smell and touch, the most intimate senses when it comes to relations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can look at someone and maybe listen to someone's voice, but if you cannot touch or smell someone,
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time, yeah, you've talked about this as well, that these senses are not, because they're not as deemed as important. A lot of the time, doctors don't know how to approach this problem. So that's another issue, right? That if we can't consult someone about it, then it becomes even more isolating and difficult to deal with.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, people who lose their sense of smell, who become anosmic, often become depressed, and then their doctor tells them, just be glad that you won't smell any farts. So what's the big deal? Be glad that you still have your sense of sight and hearing. Yeah, and I think this is also because smelling and touching happens so implicitly, subconsciously all the time. So you don't know what you got till it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's gone, you know how devastating it is.
Yeah.
And then the other person who hasn't lost their sense of smell cannot imagine what it's like until you experience it. And this is what COVID-19, of course, did.
Mm-hmm.
So many people lost their sense of smell that a greater community now realizes how essential that sense is. Yeah. Did you lose your sense of smell?
No, when I had COVID, it actually was the opposite.
Oh, oh dear.
So I had like hypersensitive smell, which also drove me crazy. But I was happy to not lose my sense of smell, because I know it's very difficult. So and also with the job I'm in, that would be a little bit difficult if I did. Yeah, so I wanted to also ask you if you could give us an example of how you've applied multisensory approaches to your curation of Mondrian.
Yes. First of all, when I started the job 2 years ago, I asked my new superior, my boss, I asked him, is it okay if during working hours I start taking boogie woogie lessons so I can better understand Mondrian? And he said, yes, of course. I'm so glad he took me seriously. So this has happened in my career path, that I meet the right people who take it seriously. So very, very grateful for that. And that what I learned in those boogie woogie classes, I teach people. People do a tour with me and I dance with them. We dance to Mondrian and then something clicks. They better understand him. We also, again, with IFF, created 3 smellscapes. And those smellscapes are his Amsterdam studio, his Paris studio, and his New York studio. he moved from Amsterdam to Paris and then to London and then died eventually in New York. And I was wondering, is it possible to smell Mondrian's development towards abstraction by recreating the smells of his studios? Because you and I both know every activity, every material comes with a different smell. So his studios were so dramatically different. Also, they changed with his style. And I thought, okay, so maybe the smells of his studio also reflect his painting style. And well, we installed the smells. People enjoy it tremendously. They say they can better imagine being in the studio, that he was a real person of flesh and blood. But I feel you can also indeed smell abstraction. Do you remember the Amsterdam smell? Can you smell it before your mind knows?
No, I always remember the New York one.
The New York one,
because
yeah.
it's so painty.
Painty, yeah.
So that's always the one I remember for some reason.
Yeah.
I mean, if for the listeners, if you are ever in The Hague, you can go and smell Piet Mondrian's 3 studios. It's very fun to experience, and yeah, they're all very different, I think, because you have kind of more musty one and then a more clean painty tape one, which is, yeah, I would say maybe even most like what you imagine Mondrian is, right? These like clean colors and yeah, so I think it captures it well.
Thanks. Yeah, and yeah, I totally agree that the New York smells so clean, so pristine, so well flat, like his paintings. There's no more pictorial space. It's so bright because Mondrian painted from his inner imagination. He didn't need his studio was so empty. All you could smell there was, well, his materials. So abstraction actually smells of the materials you use. Well, when you paint from observation and you collect a lot of items, which Mondrian did, cashmere shawls, Persian rugs, copperware. He also smoked a lot. So the really dense smell of his Amsterdam studio when he still painted naturalistically also smells so much more three-dimensional, so much darker also, so much, a lot of details, just like in his painting. So I find I didn't know this before I started this project, that this could actually be the case, that your studio smell reflects your artistic philosophy.
Yeah, it makes sense actually. Yeah. Okay, so now we will do some smelling together for this kitchen cabinet smell session. Make sure that you grab your peanut butter, and your eucalyptus or your Vicks VapoRub. You can have either one. So, and then Caro will lead you through your smelling experience. So I know that you first became interested in smell and art due to experiencing an olfactory artwork at the Venice Biennale some years ago. And can you explain quickly what olfactory art is and tell us about maybe your first encounter with it?
Yes. Also, when it comes to olfactory art, there are different definitions that I all respect. And the definition that I use is the definition, well, within autonomous arts, within visual arts, visual between brackets, when artists intentionally use the sense of smell, and when without that smell, the work of art would lose meaning or would have a different effect. That's what I call olfactory art. And the first olfactory artwork that I smelled was We Fishing the Time by Ernesto Neto. And I was still a student. I had never heard of olfactory art. I had never smelled an artwork. And I walked in the Venice Biennale, smelled something very spicy, very strong. And I thought, oh no, why am I smelling the kitchen? I'm supposed to enjoy art. This is so disturbing. My aesthetic gaze. And then I realized only hundreds of meters ahead when I saw the work of art consisting of lots of spices in lycra bags. And then I realized, okay, this smell is part of an artwork. So smell can actually be art. And then I started studying other examples of contemporary olfactory art. And then later I found out that the futurists who worked from 1909 until 1942 used so often addressed the sense of smell in their performances, artworks, poetry readings, theater, cinema, that I also started researching lost smells. Now, olfactory art, one of the most famous Dutch olfactory artworks, only Dutch people know him, I think, is by Wim T. Schippers. And he, in the 1960s, decided, just like that, to create a peanut butter floor. So the entire floor in the museum, Centraal Museum Utrecht it was covered with peanut butter. Of course, defying all kinds of unwritten rules. It should be clean, it should be clinical, it should be a white cube in a museum. He defied that. And people started playing around with it, starting rolling around in it naked, throwing sandwiches in there. So it was so much fun. And when I talk about this work of art, especially during COVID or online, I ask people to grab a jar of peanut butter to experience it, not just by seeing an image, digital image, but by smelling it. So open your jar. I think American peanut butter is a bit different, right, from Dutch peanut butter?
Well, I don't know. I always buy 100% peanut butter because I
Yeah.
like the real peanut butter. But I don't know. It would be interesting to know which kind of peanut butter was used during
Yes,
at the peanut butter platform. Do you know?
I know. Yeah, he used Calvé. I think he used Calvé. Yeah, this one.
Oh,
Calvé.
okay. Is it, does it have, is it sweeter or, because mine smells like peanuts.
It's very creamy.
Mm.
So I'm afraid it contains palm oil.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it does contain palm oil. So I would recommend other types of peanut butter. This is my documentary jar of peanut butter. And what happens then is that all the listeners right now, all the students that smell simultaneously are in the same olfactory space. And they can better imagine being in the museum where this peanut butter floor was installed. And to be real rebels, I even invite people. Did you bring your spoon, Sophia?
No, I didn't. But maybe I can use my
Your
finger.
hands. Yeah, use your finger.
Okay.
I will also use my finger then. Be a rebel and have some peanut butter as if you're vandalizing this work of art. The artist would approve of it because he enjoys a bit of craziness. If you would actually do it, you would get a fine.
Yeah, and it's not the easiest thing to eat.
No.
Quite fun, right? That you're like then got this sticky feeling in your mouth. And I remember when you explained this work in your kitchen cabinet smell sessions before, you've talked about how the smell of the peanut butter went through the entire museum space. So even if you weren't in the room where the peanut butter floor was, it was still, you would still smell it in a different room.
It took over the entire museum. I don't think the staff expected this. And when I saw it in 2000 and let's say 15 in Rotterdam, it was installed again. And then they had double doors and ventilation system, so that it wouldn't disperse throughout the entire museum. And I think that's because, of course, some people are allergic to peanuts. And I heard that people who only inhaled the air already had some starting initial allergic reaction. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
we need to.
that's a difficulty with peanut butter, right? That a lot of people are very, very allergic even to just the smell of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that was fun. That was our first smell session. We got to stick our fingers in peanut butter, which is always a nice sensation. We're activating all of our senses today.
Yes, we're touching, yeah, smelling.
So yeah, and then do you want to explain the second work of art that we will talk about?
Yes, that is a work of art by Job Koelewijn. I forgot the title.
It's Nursery Peace, and it's from 2009.
2009. Oh wow, yeah. You see,
Sorry, I
students.
put you on the spot there. I should have prefaced the work a little bit more.
2009, yeah. This too is a floor piece. So there's this strange tradition of olfactory artists in the Netherlands creating fragrant, odorous floor pieces. It's very striking. Job Koelewijn too. First, he took a book by Spinoza, De Ethica, which also talks a lot about the senses. And he took out all the leaves from the book, spread it on the floor. He also read it first, so to symbolize the knowledge in that book, spread it on the floor, then took colored, scented sand and poured the sand in mandalas, just like Tibetan monks do. This signified and embodied patience, the patience you need when you read a book like Spinoza's book. The menthol symbolizes, and not just symbolizes, but also activates your memory. So when Job Koelewijn reads from Spinoza, he makes sure to always sniff some eucalyptus or menthol, so that the next time when he starts reading again, he sniffs and he's immediately in the right atmosphere, the atmosphere of reading, very hermetic philosophy. So he wanted to convey this knowledge, this way of informing yourself with both the intellect and the sense of smell with this art piece, nursery piece, which indeed smelled of, very strong eucalyptus. Okay. Shall we sniff?
Yes. It's always very strong.
Yeah, this is so funny because now something happens to me that Job Koelewijn wants to happen. I suddenly remember a phrase. So something intellectual by smelling. I remember him saying, the smell of eucalyptus doesn't just open up your, is it called airways? Your lungs, your airways? It also opens your mind.
Wow. Well, and with this smell, you can also talk a little bit about the trigeminal nerve, right? Because it's cold. It's a cold smell. I mean, at least for me, right? That it activates that nerve that tells you about temperature.
Yes. So, and it starts cold and maybe later it becomes a bit warmer. And some substances both have the cold and the warm trigeminal effect. And here language comes in. It's interesting that and synesthesia, so we would collectively agree, yes, eucalyptus smells cold, even though cool is not a characteristic of smell. And then you can go on talking about indeed the trigeminal nerve, or how we connect colors such as blue and green to coolness, even though colors themselves, well, they don't trigger our trigeminal nerve. Might have to do with associations. I think in the United States, the tap, when you get cold water, does it have a blue?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we associate coolness with blue, etc., etc.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I haven't thought about that, at least not today or recently.
And I think that's exactly why we would associate the cold smells, so that trigger coolness, that evoke coolness, with blue. And for example, cinnamon and pepper, which are trigeminally very hot, we associate it with red.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have that red water tap.
Yeah, it's true. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it's been great having you to interview you, Caro. It's very strange to interview someone who is your friend and mentor and that you look up to so much. So it's been fun, but it was also a bit nerve-wracking as well, surprisingly. But
It's mutual. I also look up to you and all the things you do. And at such a young age, I really admire what you do.
oh, thank you. Yeah, that means a lot. So yeah, to conclude, I ask this to everybody that I interview. It could be in the industry or the scent culture world, or it could be simply a world where we learn to value our sense of smell more. But what do you think is the future of smell, or what would you like to see in the future of smell? Maybe change or continue to happen?
I hope that we will assess our body odors, and I hope of our loved ones and ourselves, and that because our body odors are a really early indication of certain diseases that can be very serious. So what if we learn to recognize when our partner, our children, or our own body odor, when it changes, and then our doctors would take us seriously when you go there and say, hey, my body odor now smells like nail polish remover. And that they would immediately know, okay, you might have diabetes or something else. So yeah, to use it as a diagnostic tool more, that could be one way of using smell in the future, and that we're trained to do this in kindergarten and later on.
That's interesting that you say that, because I just saw something online about a woman who can smell Parkinson's. And she knew because around the age of 30, her husband's smell around his neck and shoulders completely changed all of a sudden. And she didn't understand why, but because we don't go around saying, oh, like my husband's smell changed, what does that mean? She didn't know until years later, when she was around other Parkinson's patients, that actually they all smelled like the same way that her husband smelled. And so now they're working on a test that's actually going to be used for early diagnosis of Parkinson's. Did you hear about that?
I've heard about this woman, and that she's incredibly sensitive apparently to this odorants.
Yeah.
Maybe not all of us are that sensitive, but we can train, we can learn. I mean, what if there was a set of smells with the names of diseases written on those bottles? I don't know what it should look like. And then we, laymen, but also medical students, learn what the smells mean. And this is not even new. This happened in antiquity. When doctors actually taught their students to have open noses to diagnose diseases with their sense of smell, which is non-invasive and the fastest way often of diagnosis. Hippocrates actually taught his students to recognize.
It happened a lot with urine, right? That they would smell the urine to detect certain diseases.
Yeah, until recently, even until the 18th century, all doctors knew the taste and smell of their patients' urine. So if they would smell and taste it, they would know, hey, something changed. This is unimaginable now, of course.
Yeah.
Dear doctor, please assess this. No, but even from your body or an e-nose, there are more and more e-noses. Didn't you send me a link recently of an e-nose that diagnoses diseases?
Maybe. I know there's one. Didn't you say there's one at Vrije University?
There is.
Yeah.
It recognizes cancer, certain types of cancer at an early stage. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Wow. we will conclude the podcast now. And again, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today and to our listeners. And it was very fun smelling with you as well and hearing about all your work. So yeah, maybe we'll have you back again to do some more smelling.
Oh, I would love that. The pleasure was all mine. Thanks so much, Sophia.
All right. Thank you.